Welcome to the Happiness Podcast. I'm Dr. Robert Puff. If I were to ask you what is the hardest thing we can do as humans, what's challenging, what's super difficult, you may answer, well, perhaps getting a PhD, that's very challenging. Or perhaps coming up with an idea, starting a company from scratch and getting it up and running. Or perhaps being addicted to a substance and getting over it, quitting that substance. Perhaps being in a dysfunctional relationship and needing to end it, even when there are children. We definitely face difficult things in life. All of us do, sooner or later. But over the course of 30 years of helping people improve their lives, do you know what I found to be the most challenging things for people to do on a consistent basis? It's spending time alone, really alone, with no distractions, and just listening to what's going on inside of us. That is incredibly hard for almost everyone to do. And yet at the same time, I'm going to argue it is the most wonderful thing we can do for our souls and our lives. Well, first, why would this be hard? It sounds so simple. I mean, we come home, we go to a quiet place, perhaps sit in the backyard or to our room, and we just sit and we're still with no distractions. That sounds a very easy thing to do, Dr. Puff. Why do you find that hard for people to do? It is hard. It's incredibly hard. And let me explain why. We have a lot of things going on inside of us. Our thoughts, our feelings are sometimes often overwhelming. And what we do is to deal with them, or to be truthful, to not deal with them, is we distract. And there are so many distractions in our world. When life is somewhat challenging and we're having long days or just bumps throughout the day, we can just come home and turn on the television or get on our phones and be distracted by social media or watching something in the movies or on the shows. When life gets more challenging, we can distract by coming home and having a glass of wine or two or three, or indulging in some other activity like food that pushes away all these worries, all these concerns that we have rampaging through our brain. And when life gets really hard, then sadly, sometimes we turn towards drugs, prescription or non-prescription drugs, or really coming home and instead of having a glass or two of wine, a bottle or two of wine, as a way of distracting ourselves from all the turmoil inside of us. Sadly, they do work, but they make our lives putrid, and we all know that. But the common message in all of these examples is we just don't want to be alone. But not literally alone. We don't mind being by ourselves sometimes, but mentally alone, where we're shutting ourselves off from ourselves. We don't want to hear those thoughts in our head that go on and on and on. Think about an extreme case like an addiction to fentanyl. If someone gets addicted to fentanyl, most likely their lives have been incredibly hard, and while they're using the substances, they have made very poor choices that have a lot of shame connected to them. Yes, quitting fentanyl is very challenging, and they will feel the withdrawals of it. But what is much harder is facing ourselves with all the things that happen, what led us up to being addicted to fentanyl, and when we are on fentanyl, all the choices that we made. Part of being healthy is facing everything inside of us and saying, what's going on inside? What feelings do I have tucked away? What thoughts do I have rampaging through my mind? I cannot tell you the number of people I've worked with over the years that say, Dr. Puff, the only time my mind shuts off is when I come home and drink a lot. That shuts my brain off because the thoughts in my head are just overwhelming and I need peace from them. And it does work briefly. But sadly, once the substance wears off, the thoughts come back, the feelings come back, and we're overwhelmed again, and we find other things to distract from ourselves. Now, many of us listening to this talk aren't addicted to severe drugs or alcohol, but there's a lot of things we can turn to just to turn off our minds. And again, doing things that we enjoy, doing things to get by, like going to work and just doing our daily activities, are necessary requirements. But what is also a key component of living a healthy life is getting to know ourselves. And there's really only one way to do that, is by spending time with ourselves and then listening. For example, if we meet a new person and we want to get to know them, if we just constantly are talking or distracted on our phone and doing other things, we won't know them at all. But if we stop, listen, ask questions, hear what they want to share with us, then we'll develop a friendship, a relationship with them, and we'll know a little bit more about them. And with time, if they become our close friend, they'll share with us the things that they have going through their lives that are sometimes troubles or sometimes difficult. But unless they share these things, we can't help them. We can't help them improve their lives without knowing what's causing distress. It's the same way with ourselves. How can we improve our lives if we aren't spending time getting to know ourselves? And we get to know ourselves by listening. And we get to listen by spending time alone, without distractions, and just listen. Listen to the thoughts rampaging through our heads. Listen to the feelings that perhaps have been suppressed for years. Listening to our worries. Listening to our fears. Just listen. And when we do that, we'll begin to discover that there are things inside of us that need our attention. There's things inside of us that we may need to change. And then we can work on changing them, making changes to the things that we struggle with. But we can't fix things if we don't know what's broken. But by spending time alone, we can discover in our lives what is working and what isn't working, what needs to be healed, and what is going well in our lives. And once we make these discoveries, we can slowly begin the process of getting better. Now, there are two things that make this part of our journey challenging. One is when we're by ourselves, when we're alone, and we do try to listen. At first, nothing may come up except for boredom. This is boring, Dr. Puff. Why am I doing this? I don't see any point in this. But we have to stay the course and listen. I mean, could you imagine meeting someone that we've never spent time with before, and we say, hey, how are things going? Do you think they'll open up? Do you think they'll trust us? Probably not. Well, we're the same. We have inside of us defense mechanisms that keep us from ourselves, from our feelings, so we don't get overwhelmed. But these defense mechanisms also hurt us. Again, going back to my fentanyl example, fentanyl works. If your life sucks, it sucks a lot less on fentanyl. It's a horrible life, but it does work. It's the same way with the blockage we have towards ourselves. These defense mechanisms, where we shut ourselves off from our feelings, do work, but they come with consequences. So we're going to ask ourselves, is it safer to expose ourselves to our feelings, or is it better just to keep using the numbing techniques to our thoughts and feelings that we've used throughout our life? We're not going to change overnight, but once we understand that, it makes complete sense to periodically have time alone where we're really listening to what's going on inside of us. If we want to change and improve our lives, we have to do this. So if we never do it, which I think is a majority of people, truly the vast majority of people on the planet, never really just listen. Oh, they'll hear the thoughts, they'll hear the worries, they'll hear the fears, but truly being still and listening without judgment, without criticism, without trying to fix it, just listening is a very challenging task, yet an utterly beautiful task that will change our lives in so many ways. And if we begin to commit to spend time alone and truly just listening to what's going on inside of us, I believe we'll find that there's so much to be discovered, and at the same sense, things that can be healed and truly healed forever. We'll stop numbing these fears, these worries, these pains, and we'll heal them. And more importantly, we'll find that instead of being the rat going around and around on the spinning wheel, we'll discover that we don't have to keep stressing over these fears. We will find solutions to our problems. And a lot of them is acceptance. A lot of them is letting go. But there are solutions to our problems. But if we just perseverate over the same problems and then distract, and we go back to the problems and then we distract, we're not going to fix them. We have to listen, really listen, and then learn ways to quiet these fears. Learn ways to heal these emotions. That's in part one of the key components of this podcast. How to heal from things in our past that are challenging, that are difficult. How to change the way we look at things. And when we change them, they shift, they change. But we can't change them unless we listen and know what's going on inside of us. So that's the number one benefit of spending time alone, of getting to know who we are, what we're struggling with, and working towards fixing things. But there is another very important and key component of spending time alone. And that's in that alone time, when our minds truly get still, we're going to find a peace that surpasses all understanding. We're going to find a tranquility that is incredibly beautiful. We're going to find a happiness that springs up naturally for no cause at all. We're going to find that our truly natural state, when all our fears and all our worries are gone, is one of peace, is one of joy. When we empty our thoughts, when we free our minds of all the fears, anxieties, worries, and even goals, when we just live in the present moment, 100% present, we'll find that life is beautiful. But this perhaps is the most difficult thing to do. Making time to just be. And to do that, we need time alone. And how do we spend time alone? There are many ways, but let me just talk about a few before we end. One is just making a space in our house or somewhere nearby that we can go to and just be alone. Learning about meditation and mindfulness is a great way to discover how to be still and be alone. Going on a day retreat where we just get away from the whole world and don't speak for a day, where we can just be, perhaps with other people, but where it's silent, where it's still. Getting away for a weekend, finding a retreat center near our home where we can go and be still. And then maybe once a year, going away for a week where we just go and be silent. That's more challenging, but it will be a transformational experience if you're ever able to do it. There are so many benefits to spending time alone, but the two big ones are discovering who we are and what's happening inside of us, because so many of us have no idea, or run from it, or hide from it, hiding from ourselves. But the second thing is, when we learn to still the mind, when we learn to be present without all our egoic thoughts and our feelings and everything that distracts us around the world, when we learn just to be alone, we'll find in that aloneness is truly a beauty and a peace that is beyond description and gorgeous. Thank you for joining me on the Happiness Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please go to happinesspodcast.org. And until next time, accept what is, love what is.